What's up troops, it's me TheTacticalBrit and we're back again today with another episode of Tactical Tuesday. And today we're going to be looking at everything you can do to win engagements in something I like to call the staging process. Now Battlefield 5 is a game that revolves a lot of objectives. Objective gameplay in Battlefield 5 is more or less the core to everything that happens in the game, and it really dictates how people flow in and around maps. People are looking to get points, people are looking to get kills, and the obvious way of doing so is to head to objectives or head to key central focuses within the map, such as the large bridge on Twisted Steel, for example. Now, within all of these objectives, you'll find 9 times out of 10, there will always be one dedicated flow from one objective to another. There will always be ones that connect logically, and people will move between them in a style that the map itself almost intends. You know, it wants you to go a certain way and it wants you to head in certain directions, and it's trying to encourage positive gameplay like taking objectives. And staging is a process whereby somebody on an objective can really get a good idea of what's going to go down and give themselves a position that maximizes all the potential that they have to take out enemies. And it's something that I do more or less in the back of my head methodically every time I encounter an objective I go on, based on what information I have available to me and how easy that information will be to assist in getting lots of kills and defending or attacking an objective. And I'll show you exactly it is how I do that. So, staging is a process whereby you simply have to look at your minimap and simply have to understand the map flow of any given objective. On lots of maps there are very dedicated lanes between certain objectives. On FL652 for example, it's very clear which objective is next up in terms of where you should be heading, from sort of like A to B or C to D. There are lots of clear lines. Those are the lanes that are available in the game. It's very much an Operation Locker style map that shows those lanes explicitly and makes it very clear where people are going to be coming from. On less obvious maps like Twisted Steel, those lanes still exist. They definitely still have a flow point between them. Objectives still flow between one another, even if they're not necessarily as obvious in the lanes that are pre-described in something like FL652. And when you understand how people move between these objectives based on what ones are captured around you and where an enemy is likely to come from, you can really put yourself in a position of importance that will give you a sheer dominant control over an objective. And let me give you a few examples of this. Here on FL652, I've invaded this objective here over at E, and because I've managed to do this pretty successfully, I know where it is exactly the enemies are coming from. They had objective D captured, although we did eventually get it back, and their deployment point is of course in between E and D, and operates as a central flow point for them to come straight into the objectives. Now, on FL652, they actually use sort of varying levels of land to make the approach out of the spawn point into E and D relatively easy. They give them sort of a higher ground approach with some rocks, a middle ground approach, and a lower ground approach. And because of that, you almost have to get into a position that has a scope on all 3 of those locations. And the easiest thing for me to do in this example, knowing that C was captured by us and then eventually captured by the enemy team, was really just to sit at the very northern point of E. This is a point that allows me to have good lines of sight into the C pathways and also good lines of sight into the actual spawn point pathways themselves, and because of that it allowed me to execute incredibly well. I knew where people were coming from, I knew where my likely threats were going to be, and because of that I always had the drop on them, and you can see from the gameplay it was very clear that these guys weren't anticipating me to be in such a good position. A similar situation also happened on Twisted Steel, where we had captured Objective C and things did look pretty sticky. Objective B, which is the bridge to the north, was heavily contested at the time, and Objective A to the west had been completely captured. And I knew that the very northern point of C was completely clear because I was occupying the main building that almost determined whether or not that entire region was safe. And this ended up being my staging point. This building exactly, the upper ground and lower ground worked incredibly well here, because as the objective started being captured, I knew the northern side was relatively clear and that the enemies must have looped round from A. They must have come in from the back of the objective and been working their way south to north, or at the very minimum west to north. And because of that, I knew where the targets were and I knew where enemies were going to be, and you can see from the gameplay here that I chose a staging point that gave me the best possible advantage to at least give them some kind of competition. I never necessarily won the objective back and I did die eventually, but you can imagine if you can make such an individual performance as one player, the likelihood of a team being able to capture objectives is significantly higher if your staging point from the get-go is one of good significance. Now there are a few points I want to go over as well. The first one is that staging points aren't always necessarily the most obvious thing in the world. You don't have to choose the big open target, you don't have to choose the massive bridge or the big cathedral or, you know, the thing that almost is designed to attract attention. The best staging points in Battlefield are actually places that are a bit more out of the way but command authority of the area. That small building at the very top of C that I just mentioned on Twisted Steel wasn't necessarily the standout feature of that area, it wasn't the biggest building, but it was enough that it allowed me to be discreet in where I was and still be effective and command the authority of the overall area. And I think people make a regular mistake when they try to attack and defend objectives, where they go for the obvious routes and the obvious buildings and the things that look like they should be headed towards. Because in actuality in Battlefield, that's a very swift way of getting yourself killed, and you only need to look at the cathedral on Devastation or the giant bridge on Twisted Steel to see that obvious structures that attract lots of people never necessarily result in good outcomes in the game. So troops, that's about it for today for the entire video on staging. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. If you have any questions, anything you want me to cover in tactics, or, you know, just any kind of general Battlefield shenanigans really, let me know what you have to say in the comment section. As always, it's been me, the Tactical Brit, and I'll see you again soon in the next video.